So we left off, we had started 2 Samuel last week, and we left off in the middle of chapter 1. And we're starting with verse 17, which is David. It's a beautiful, I want to read it. It's just a beautiful, beautiful poem of sorts where David mourns the death of Saul and Jonathan. And I think it's well, we'll read it and then we'll talk about it. And first of all, let's read the first. And David intoned his dirge over Saul and his son Jonathan. Okay, so that's clear. He's mourning them, and he's going to. It's a sort of eulogy, but it's actually as a poem. He ordered the Judites, or the people from Judah, the Judeans, to be taught the Song of the Boat. It is recorded in the book of Yashar. So basically, this is a poem that is going to be recorded separately, and he's saying it because he wants all the people of Judah to learn it and understand it, which is really amazing, because what is happening, remember the context here. Saul has been chasing David nonstop, okay, and basically stops in order to fight the Philistines, okay? David has many opportunities to kill Saul along the way to protect himself, and he refuses. And the last thing we have is the fact that David ends up having this Amalekite killed because he was admitted and was proud of the fact that he had actually killed Saul, although we doubted whether he had actually killed Saul. But the problem was with his attitude and his whole, his opportunism and the fact that he was proud of killing a king of Israel. So on the one hand, you have David, who all along has been consistent in, even though Saul is like my enemy, he is a king of Israel, and therefore I will not harm him in any way. And so when he now is going to eulogize Saul, it's not just that he's having his personal eulogy. He wants to make sure that the tribe of Judah, now why the tribe of Judah? Because that's his tribe. And all along, if there was anyone that stayed loyal to David, and even in the tribe of Judah, he had some problems. If you remember, some of the people from Suf were tattled on him to Saul. Oh, we know where you can find, David. But if there was any place in the whole of Israel that he could have some measure of protection, it would have been among the Judeans, who were his tribe. And as we see in chapter 2, which hopefully we're all also going to start today, soon after all of this, we have a civil war of sorts that develops between those who are following the heir of Saul and those who follow David. David initially is only going to be king in Judea, of the tribe of Judah, and it will be 7.5 years before he becomes king of all of Israel because of this civil war. So I think what he's doing, he must understand that already, that this is where things are going. And it's important to him to communicate to Judah, I may be only your leader for now. And it could very well be that the rest of Israel is not going to accept me, but I'm not playing this game. Because at the end of the day, Saul was a king of Israel, and I'm going to mourn him. And I want you, people of Judah, to be part of this mourning. I want you to record this. I want this to be part of your history book, because this is how the people of Israel respond to the death of a king of Israel. If he was anointed by God, he will be mourned. If he helped the people of Israel in any way, even though he may have sinned, even though, in the case of David, personally trying to hurt him, trying to kill him, but as this is his office, this is who he is, this is who he represents, and this is something the people of Judea need to learn. And so I find that verse 18 extremely significant in that way. So now let's start reading the verse, the dirge, or the poem itself. Your glory, O Israel. Okay, that's Tzvi Israel. Tzvi is actually not glory. Tzvi is a deer. Okay, or a gazelle, or one of these deer-like animals. I'm not really good at figuring out which they are, but I think it's might be in the gazelle family. Anyway, so basically, it is talking about Israel as a deer, okay, but as this glorious animal. And so it is using this image to talk about the glory of Israel. Okay, lie slain on your heights. How have the mighty fallen? Okay, so basically it's referring to Saul, the king of Israel, who is now fallen, and describing him in the terms of this deer and this gazelle as this majestic, mighty, wonderful picture. Bambi, Bambi with those big antlers or something. Now they don't have those kind of deers in Israel with the big antlers. That's a North American brand of deer, but it's the same idea, this kind of fast and whatever kind of animal. Okay, how have the mighty fallen? Now, that is a one that we all know that phrase. How have the mighty fallen, or how have the mighty have fallen? And we use it all the time, but actually it's somewhat mistranslated. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. So when we talk about how the mighty have fallen in our normal parlance, mighty can refer to anything. Okay, it can refer to anything outstanding. It can be someone who's wealthy, somebody who's strong, someone who's powerful, any kind of person who is kind of at the top of his game and then falls. We will say how the mighty have fallen. Okay. And sometimes actually we're saying it in a kind of mocking tone when we see somebody that we never liked anyway, but who was very arrogant and very powerful. And then we see them, kind of falling down into a totally different kind of state, weaker. And then we're very happy. How the mighty have fallen. Ha, ha, ha. You thought you were big stuff. And look what's happened to you. Here, it is being said in utmost seriousness. There's no irony here. There is no mocking here. This is totally serious. Now, in the Hebrew, it says, Ech naflu giborim. How the giborim have fallen. Now, gibor is a word that does not mean mighty. Okay? It doesn't mean mighty. Now, we've done this in the past, and I love doing this, but let's take a look at the very first time that we met Saul. Okay, so Saul was first introduced to us in 1 Samuel chapter 9, the very first verse, first two verses. And what do we read? There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, son of Aviel, son of Tzor, son of Horat, son of Aviah, a Benjaminite. Okay, and then we have a word here, a man of substance. That's how my Bible has the last few words of verse 1 in chapter 9, a man of substance. Actually, in Hebrew, the word here is gibor chayil. Now, it's the exact same word, gibor, as we have here describing Saul at the end of his life. Okay, a gibor. But here, the word gibor is actually referring to Saul's father, not to Saul himself. But there's an impression here that this gibor chayil, this whatever gibor means, is also going to affect how we see Saul. And then we see in verse 2, he had a son whose name was Saul, an excellent young man. No one among the Israelites was handsomer than he was, a head taller than any of the people. Here, I think I also talked about the fact that he translates the same word in the same verse two different ways. An excellent young man, the word tov is translated here as excellent, and then in the next sentence, handsome is exactly the same word in Hebrew. So he's either excellent or he's handsome, but he can't be both for the same word because they don't mean the same thing. The truth of the matter is the better translation for there is excellent. So if you think about it, his father's a man of substance and his son is excellent. Okay. But a man of substance, okay, basically what's happened here is the word gibor chayil literally means, the word gibor itself either means a hero or a warrior, okay? And it's chayil is a reference to military. So gibor, if you say it's a hero, it's like a military hero. And if it's gibor chayil and you put them together, sometimes you might put those two words together and translate that into a mighty warrior, okay? But gibor by itself usually means a hero or a particularly hero in the military sense, maybe a strong fighter or something like that, okay? So I understand why, and I actually looked this up. Why is it translated into a man of substance? Because there's no indication that Saul's father actually went to war. And they find other instances of this word, gibor chayil, that sometimes refers to the person as, yes, literally it means a mighty warrior or a hero, a military hero, but it could also refer to, in this case, mean a man of substance. In other words, an important man, a wealthy, important man, a leader, okay? But the literal translation definitely is a military warrior. So that's also how we first meet Saul, as someone who is a gibor, who is a hero or a warrior. Let's use hero for now. I think it's an easier word to accommodate here. And so basically, here, again, this same translation in the beginning, in Samuel 1, when we talk about Saul, translates the word gibor into a man of substance. And here translates it in our chapter 1, verse 19, translates the word into mighty. They don't mean the same thing. Not man of substance, not mighty, okay? But again, if we use the word hero, I think it makes a lot more sense. His father was a military hero. The assumption is Saul also had the potential to be like his father, a military hero. And definitely that's what he ends up being. If there's one thing that Saul did succeed in, from the beginning, he succeeded militarily. He really did help Israel stave off the enemies until the end when he was defeated by the Philistines. But the first go against the Philistines, he defeated them, and he defeated the Ammonites, and he defeated Amalek, okay? And all kinds of people in between. But here, okay, so let's say how the heroes have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Do not proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistine rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exalt. Okay, so here, all of these places, Gath, Ashkelon, and Philistine, these are all Philistine cities. And again, the uncircumcised, we have frequently in the book of Samuel seen the Philistines referred to as uncircumcised. So this verse is talking about, we don't want to talk about this to the Philistines because they will rejoice in the fact that their enemy has been defeated. O hills of Gilboa. Now remember, he was actually killed. He found his death on Mount Gilboa. So this is how he addresses it. O hills of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain on you, or bountiful fields, for there the shield of warriors lay rejected, the shield of Saul polished with oil no more. Okay, so again, the same word gibor or giborim that we saw in verse 19 that was translated as mighty, here the word giborim is actually translated as warriors. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so very interesting. On Mount Gilboa is a mountain in the Galilee, Lower Galilee, just west of the Sea of Galilee, the southwest, sort of. And you could, of course, go there today. There are some wonderful communities on the Gilboa, near the Gilboa. And to this very day, one side of the Gilboa is a barren mountain, and the other side of the Gilboa is lush and green. And the tradition has it, now we can explain this weather-wise, it's because it is the part of the break in Israel. Of those of you who have traveled in Israel, for example, if you're driving in Samaria and you're driving east in Samaria, for a certain point, you're going up, 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 the elevation goes up and the mountains, nothing is lush and green, but it's green, it has trees, and whatever. And then you cross this divide and you start going down towards the Jordan Valley, and the landscape changes completely, and you suddenly see desert landscapes, very dry and brown, etc. So basically what happens, and you see that in places all over the world, the rain clouds coming in from the sea drop the rain as they're rising up. And so by the time they get to the other side of the mountain, the rain clouds are empty. And that is one of the reasons why, as you go down to the Jordan Valley, you have a desert area. So Mount Gilboa fits that, okay? One side of it is as it goes up, green, and as it goes down, brown. But there is a tradition that says this is because David cursed the mountain, and this is the direction that he faced as he was talking to Gilboa, that it was that side of the mountain that he cursed. Okay, so we'll continue with with verse 22. From the blood of slain, from the fat of warriors. Again, that word again, giborim. This word giborim, if there is one word that repeats itself over and over in this, eulogy, it is the word giborim, warriors or heroes. From the fat of warriors, the bow of Jonathan never turned back. The sword of Saul never withdrew empty, talking about how brave they were. No enemy ever scared them. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and cherished, never parted in life or in death. So until this point, the beginning, he's talking mostly about Saul and the death of the king of Israel. Towards the end in verse 22, he talks both about Jonathan and Saul, but not as their relationship to one another, but as two warriors, two mighty warriors of Israel that fell tragically in war. But here in verse 23, we see the relationship between Saul and Jonathan, father and son, beloved and cherished, never parted in life or in death. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Okay. And now then, of course, tragically, and we know this, we know that at the background of all of this, Jonathan and David were as close as could be. But when the push came to shove and Saul decided he wanted to kill David, David and Jonathan separated. Jonathan went back as a loyal son to his father, but at the same point, he swore David and Jonathan swore a treaty or a covenant of alliance between the two of them forever that would carry over to their children as well. So here you see that this beloved and cherished never parted in life, meaning Jonathan ended up going back to his father, and he supports that, David. He doesn't resent it. He says, no, this was father and son. They belonged together in life, and of course, in death. They both died in that same battle. Daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in crimson and finery, who decked your robes with jewels of gold. He is talking, and of course, when you talk about daughters of Israel, you'll recall daughters of Israel have a very, and it's probably true of all the other cultures at this time in ancient Israel, or the ancient Middle East, that it's the daughters of Israel that tend to sing or act as a sort of chorus in heroes coming back from war. You'll recall that when David began, when he slew Goliath, but after that, when he became Saul's general and he would come back from these battles, we have this understanding that the daughters of Israel came out and greeted David, and they said Saul is killing them in the thousands, but David is killing them in the tens of thousands. Okay. And in fact, later on, when David takes refuge with the Philistines, and he's trying to prove his loyalty to Achish, king of one of the princes of the Philistines, and the other Philistines doubt David's loyalty. What do? They quote that statement of the daughters of Israel, the women who come out and say, David slew them in the tens of thousands, and he's trying to say, but David is part of Israel, so he's up there with Saul, neck and neck. But here, David calls to these same daughters of Israel to weep over Saul. And this is also, the whole problem between David and Saul began, if you will, with these daughters of Israel who would say, well, Saul may be great, but David's even greater. And now he's calling to those same, well, not necessarily the same people, but the same idea, the same women who tend to play an important role of welcoming the soldiers when they come back from war, telling them to weep over Saul. Okay, this is not a time to say David was greater than Saul. This is the time to weep over Saul, for he was a great king. And then talking about their own finery, their own gold is thanks to him. In other words, he was the one who, because he defeated the enemies of Israel, brought economic prosperity to the nation. And so he's giving them an understanding of why they should feel personally indebted to Saul and weep for him. Verse 25, again, we have the exact same verse, the same thing we have at the end of verse 19, we have here. But again, it's how have the mighty fallen? So the translation can't figure out if it's warriors or mighty. Let's go back to heroes. How have the heroes fallen? In the thick of battle, Jonathan slain on your heights. I grieve for you, my brother. Okay, now here we start talking about Jonathan and just Jonathan. Okay, he talks, until now it's Saul and Jonathan, but when he talks about Jonathan, he's talking about Jonathan as Saul's son or as a fellow warrior. Now, in these last verses, he becomes very personal. And here he remembers the Jonathan that was his best friend. How have the the heroes fallen. In the thick of battle, Jonathan slain on your heights. Okay, on your heights. It's like the word here in Hebrew is bamotecha, and bama is an altar, or very often translated as the high places. Okay, it can also mean like a stage, but it's very, in other words, it's talking about a height, no question. But the word used here is a reference to these high places, which are often referred to in the book of Samuel and certainly in the book of Kings as places where the nation of Israel sometimes worshipped pagan gods, or maybe worshiped God, but on the high places instead of in Jerusalem. Here, he doesn't have that kind of negative connotation at all, but it takes the other idea of a bama, which is any kind of ceremonial central place, high place. The nation can gather around and they look up, and whatever ceremony is going on there. And we know that Saul, for example, Saul is first meets the nation. If you recall, he's going to find Samuel, and he goes to this high place, and he goes up onto that high place, and it's like a stage in that situation, but it's the exact same Hebrew word, bama, and that's where he meets Samuel, who effectively just after that anoints him. So it kind of is a reference to the fact that, who's on the heights? The kings, the special, the leaders. And so he's creating, Jonathan will never be king. Jonathan will never be king because, first of all, God already said the kingdom is not going to Saul's son, it's going to David. But David, in a way, is expressing the fact that no Saul, no Jonathan, in a way, you too were a king. You fell on your heights. You fell as a star, as a leader. I grieve for you, my brother Jonathan, so poignant. You were most dear to me. Your love was wonderful to me. I would say like this, that your love for me, this is how I would translate that word, your love for me was awesome, was amazing, from the word of like awe and wonder. Okay, not wonderful is great, but wonderful is full of wonder. Your love for me. Okay, and here it's saying it was wonderful to me. The Hebrew is really saying your love for me was wonderful, more than the love of women. How have the heroes fallen? The weapons of war perished. So first of all, I think in this, it's very moving what he says about Jonathan and how he talks about him as his brother. We talked before when we discussed the relationship between Jonathan and David, and we discussed to what extent it was a bit of a lopsided relationship. We had a sense all along that although David cared deeply for Jonathan, there's no question that it was Jonathan who loved David and was devoted to David more than David was devoted to him. And I think that's why my correction of that translation is so critical, because what David is saying here is your love for me was amazing. It wasn't amazing to me, your love for me. And he doesn't say my love for you was the same, okay? He talks about how you were my brother and you were dear to me. Your love for me, that's already a higher level, okay? You're not just brother, I wasn't just your brother. I wasn't just dear to you. You loved me. And David, on the other hand, can say I felt like you were my brother. You were dear to me, but he can't say I loved you. And so there was always this disparity, and David basically confirms that disparity, but in a very nice way. He's not saying it to disparage Jonathan in any way, but just to state as it was, and how I think what he's saying here is that he was incredibly warmed and helped and encouraged by Jonathan's love for him, even though he didn't reciprocate it to the same level. How have the mighty fallen, or how have the heroes fallen? The weapons of war perished. And here I think it is extremely important, understanding this verse, to go back to what the real meaning of Gibor is. It's and very common, particularly in biblical poetry. Okay, you will have parallels. In one verse, you will have two legs, so to speak, in that one verse, and the two legs both say something very similar. And so, what's usually happening is in the first leg, words are used that become synonyms of the words in the second leg. So we have here how the Gibor, how the heroes or the warriors have fallen. And the second part of that, the weapons of war have perished, are basically saying the same thing. But fallen is replaced by perished, okay? And what is weapons of war replacing? The word Gibor. It's not mighty, it's warrior. A weapon of war and a warrior is the same. A weapon of war and mighty is not the same. So that's really, that's the end of this verse. And there's, I think also, let's say Gibor, we translate it as warrior, and that's definitely consistent throughout. But if we also say the hero, I think there's something very ironic. And to me, it recalls the concept that is very common in Shakespeare, for instance. I don't know how many of you have studied Shakespeare, but I think Shakespeare was one of the greatest poets of all time. And I loved Shakespeare when I was at university. I studied Shakespeare a great deal. But we have a concept from that type of his dramas, his tragedies, called a tragic hero. What is a tragic hero? Remember the word hero. I remember in high school when we first learned it, we heard about the word hero. We immediately felt, oh, a hero. He's somebody you look up to, someone you think is absolutely fabulous, right? But a tragic hero is actually someone who is great and has the potential to be great. But what's tragic is that he fails. A tragic hero becomes somebody who could have been a hero or started out as a hero and then fails. And that's what makes him a tragic hero, okay? There's something heroic about how he is, even as he fails, because you're considering what he could have been. And I think there's no bet until, and that way I kind of like the translation of Gibor as hero rather than warrior. It's a little more all-encompassing, because I see Saul very much as a tragic hero. In many ways, Jonathan becomes a tragic hero in the wake of Saul, because he goes back to Saul and sticks with his father as a loyal son. He loses what could have been a position with David. The two of them together could have been a powerhouse, okay? And it was Saul's obsession that killed that. They both had such amazing potential, both Saul and Jonathan. They were warriors. They were good people. They were God-fearing. They started out, just remember how we first met Saul as someone who was better than anyone else, taller than anyone else, the son of a hero, okay? And here you have, at the end of his life, there becomes a sense that there was so much potential, but the potential was gone. And I think that, I really thought we would start chapter 2 today, but I guess we're not going to do that. But I just love this poem, and I'm glad we did spend that extra time on it. Any questions or comments from anybody?
Can I ask then, how would you translate Eshet Chayil from Mishlei?
A woman of valor. So the word valor is similar. There's also a military connotation to it. Valor, valiant. It's the same root. There is this idea of bravery, courage, military, perhaps not literally military, but with that idea of valor, courage, whatever.
Okay.
Not to labor the point too much, but can we just go back to this word mighty, which is used 5 times in this passage? You've got it 3 times associated with how are the mighty fallen. There, I think the word is Gibor, you said, and you have translated it. You see it's best translated as hero in this particular.
Well, warrior is fine, but see, I don't know how it's in your Bible. In verse 19, what does it say?
How are the mighty fallen?
Okay, now look at verse 21. For there the shield of
the mighty.
Okay, so in my Bible, the English translation then calls it warriors. In other words, the English translation is inconsistent, because the same word Gibor or Giborim is indeed in this poem 5 times. Okay. And my English translates the first and last as mighty, and the middle 3, no, the first and the second and the last 2. Number 1, number 4, number 5 is mighty. Number 2 and
Yes.
3 is warriors, even though in Hebrew it's the same word.
Which version have you got?
That was my
It's
question.
it's the Jewish Publication Society, but I think it's based on the King James and adjusted. Most
it
of the
the
English
NIV?
ones,
Is it the JNIP, this one?
it's Jewish Publication Society.
Okay,
It's not that.
okay.
It's actually the Jewish Publication Society, and it says here, Hebrew text based on a translation. It says the translation is the Jewish Publication Society, but I understand that when they referred a lot to the King James. It's not the same as the King James, but it does refer. I don't know why they took the same word and translated it 2 different ways in the same poem.
I'm sure
It makes no sense.
Yeah, I have mighty.
No, but at least in your Bible, Carol, it's all the same word. And I think warriors is a much better
And-
word than
and
mighty.
Yeah.
It makes it has more dramatic effect if it keeps on repeating.
Of course, that's what you get in the Hebrew. Pauline, you were going to say something?
No, it's just in the NIV. It's mighty in each one, which is not really. I'm amazed. I'm amazed the NIV likes to repeat anything. That's usually they like different words. When I was doing Ruth, I was doing shuv, tashuv, and they kept having different words. So they don't like to repeat.
You know, it was really funny. I had this incident. I was visiting in a church, I don't know, some months ago, and I was meeting with the pastor, and he says, "Oh, I'm glad I have a question." He pulls out his Bible and he shows me a verse, and in English, and he says, "I'm not quite sure how do you read this verse?" And I read the verse, and I was looking at the before and after, and I did not understand the context. I'm thinking, what's going on here? I go back to my Hebrew, and it makes perfect sense. And I go back to the English, and it was, I don't know what trend. Then I understood what had happened. He was using this translation. I don't know what it's called, but it's some very, very modern translation that doesn't translate it all literally.
Oh, is that the
It just
Passion? It's known as the Passion.
It could be. That's it. And it like summarizes each
Oh,
verse.
it's dreadful. Yeah.
And I'm like, this has nothing to do with the original verse. I was, and he
Like
said
a living
that he
Bible.
often uses it because the young people connect to it better. I said, well, I'm glad the young people connect to it, but they're not learning the Bible.
Yeah.
All good.
No, it's the same thing with some of the Psalms that someone wrote it. It's nothing to do with it. It's totally wrong.
My eldest son, they're both geeks, but my eldest son about 20 years ago did a Bible study on a linear continuum of which English version you should be looking at to do what sort of job. And on the one side, it was completely literal according to the Hebrew, going to another side where it became the Living Bible. And
Just paraphrasing, yeah.
Right, paraphrase.
Transliterations, and according to whether you wanted to do a study or whether you wanted to get some meaning or something else, you chose your Bible. So then you sort of thought, okay, well, I'll use this one for this tool for this job, and I'll I could do it that
It's
way.
dreadful.
But
Yeah, it drives me mad.
Okay, this
I think paraphrase
Bible
Bibles. I don't understand paraphrase Bibles because in essence they're Bible stories, but they present themselves as being loyal to the original text. I am in favor of Bible stories. Bible stories has their place because it is important, especially for younger children and whoever, but even older people. Okay, just give me this story. Okay, let them have a little bit of the story. Okay, but don't call yourself studying the Bible.
Yeah.
But the word story conveys the idea of fiction, doesn't it? I'd never use the word story because it's like it's not true.
It's just
no, I don't mean story, narrative, let's say, maybe is a better word, but
Claudette,
were you going to say something?
Sondra, the JPS version has it as mighty and warrior.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I'm reading from the JPS.
That's fine.
It switches, right?
Yeah, they switch it. Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm reading. Yes, Lynn, what were you going to say?
I think whereas the old King James used to be used, I think nowadays most people use the new King James, which has mighty throughout. And when you're correcting lots of other words, you said it shouldn't be this. We've got what you're saying in the new King James. And I think the new standard is this, it's just virtually the same. And then you've got the NIV
Yeah.
which followed
This
afterwards,
is,
which
yeah.
has
So
got
I've
more.
got the old King James and Carol's got the old King James. So they're quite similar to the King
I
James.
actually, when I study the Bible, I'm
Yeah,
using
yeah,
only the
yeah,
Hebrew.
yeah.
So I go to the English just for this class, and then I sometimes glance at it before, and then I notice where there's translation issues, and then I bring them up. But my frame of reference when I'm teaching or when I'm studying or when I'm drawing conclusions is based on the Hebrew.